All right, so this is our first real dive into some AP Euro content. And so this is the first major topic that'll show up on the exam. I'm going to try to break this, I think, into three different videos. I think we'll spend about 3 or 4 days on this topic in class, and it's the Renaissance. So this is one of those topics that gets a lot of attention. It's one of the fun topics with lots of art and stuff, and we will, of course, look at some art as we go. Uh, but uh, we've got to keep in mind that when we think about the Renaissance, this is one of those things that historians look at as a thing that happened with the benefit of hindsight. While this was happening, people really weren't aware that the Renaissance was a thing. So, with all that being said, let's dive in and look at some definitions. So, let's just define the terms of what we're looking for here. Some definitions. So, historically speaking, we're kind of thinking about the Renaissance as the period between 1350 and 1550. The Renaissance does kind of have a specific end date. We'll get to that eventually. Um, Now, this is kind of a tricky time period to assign to a thing because this didn't happen the same across Europe. So the Renaissance starts in Italy around the 1350s. It spreads throughout Europe. Every place in Europe is going to have some touch of the Renaissance in it, but it's not all happening in this time frame at the same time in the same place. So it didn't happen the same across Europe, and it didn't happen at the same time across Europe. But generally speaking, what we're talking about here is the re-emergence, or in this case, rebirth of Greco-Roman ideas. So, reemergence or rebirth of Greco Roman ideas. Renaissance kind of means rebirth in French. So, it is the reemergence or rebirth of these Greco Roman ideas that were kind of lost or kind of forgotten about by Europeans and brought back by the Crusades. So a lot of crusaders brought back some of these texts that were written by Greek or Roman philosophers or historians, and they brought them back from the Holy Land where they were kept, or copies of them were kept, and they brought them back to Europe, and people got all excited about them again, and so thus rebirth. It's kind of the same way that people get excited about clothes from like 30 or 40 years ago when they go thrift store shopping. You know, it's kind of like a fad. So, another way we could think about the Renaissance is that this is the period of time between the Middle Ages, which we just got done talking about, and the Enlightenment. So if we think about this in terms of like increasing intellectual brilliance, we call the Middle Ages the quote unquote Dark Ages. The Renaissance is like the light switch turning back on. And in the Enlightenment, we are finally all bright again in Europe like we were in the Roman period. But again, remember that these are not these definitions that we're looking at are created by historians with the benefit of hindsight. So both of these kinds of periodizations didn't exist until like the 19th century. So the Renaissance itself, so the term Renaissance wasn't used until 1855. So it wasn't until 1855 that anyone actually used the term Renaissance to describe what it is that we're talking about. So remember, this is not a concrete thing that people were aware of. This isn't a concrete thing people were aware of. In fact, the Renaissance only touched a very, very small number of people. Most people didn't even realize this was happening. So most people didn't even realize that the quote unquote Renaissance was even a thing that was happening during this period. But we do know that there was a new intellectual movement that started in Italy that we now know as the Renaissance. So I guess the next question is, why did this start in Italy? Why did the Renaissance start in Italy? So there are a number of reasons why this starts in Italy. First, Italy was devastated by the plague. I've seen estimates of some regions of Italy seeing approximately 90% mortality rates. Because of the population density. Italy was the most densely populated area, so population density was very high in Italy, and the plague spread like wildfire. So there are places in Italy that had almost 90% mortality rates because of the bubonic plague. And because of that, it acted as a blank slate to try out new ideas. It's like everybody's dead. The survivors are like, well, what the hell? We'll give it a try. We'll give all this other stuff a try. Italy was also one of the richest areas of Europe. So they had the money to try out all this new stuff. To try out new stuff and fund all of the art and philosophy that the Renaissance is known for. So they had the money to do this. It was also very highly educated. Italy had one of the highest literacy rates prior to the Renaissance, and that's because of the presence of the church. So the church had to teach its people how to read. People who worked for the church had to know how to read or know something in the education realm. And so, there were more educated people in Italy than anywhere else. Okay, so that kind of tells us why this is happening in Italy. So we're going to look at the Renaissance through a number of different lenses. We'll start first with the economic side of it, because we've been talking about economics here for just a minute. So why did Italy have all this money? So I guess the first question we'll ask is, why was Italy so rich? So where did they get all this money from? So there were a number of trade networks operating in Europe. The Italians were one of them, kind of run by Venice. But there were other ones. So there was like the Venetian trade network, but there was another rival trade network called the Hanseatic League. So the Hanseatic League was in Northern Europe. And like the Italian trade networks in the Mediterranean, the Hanseatic League kind of worked in the north and the Baltic Sea. And there was a string of cities like stretching from London over to like Amsterdam, all the way over to Novgorod in Russia. So kind of along the northern coast of Europe, you had the Hanseatic League. Now, the Hanseatic League by the 1400s, the Hanseatic League had begun to not collapse, but they began to kind of wane in power. So Italy was doing a lot more business than the Hanseatic League, and eventually the Hanseatic League kind of just fell apart. They fell apart because of Italy's trade power. And as Italy started to get more money, as Italy got richer, they started investing in things beyond trade. Luxury goods, silk making, printing, all sorts of things that rich people wanted to buy. Additionally, they also got involved in banking. And this is where we're going to bring in one of these really famous Renaissance families, the Medicis. or Medicis, depending on how you want to say it, the Medici family. So these guys were in Florence. These are the main guys of Florence. And these guys got really rich as bankers. And they became so rich and powerful that they became bankers to the Pope. Now, that might sound really prestigious, but it's actually not. Because if you loan money to the Pope, he may not pay you back. Do you really want to go knocking on the Pope's door asking for your money back? The guy that can condemn you to hell? No, you pretty much just let him be. And so the Medici family, the bank, actually collapsed in 1497 because they lost so much money to the Pope.
Do you have any microfibers?
They loaned so much money to the Pope that they collapsed. He didn't pay them back, and there's not really anything you could do about it. So Italy got all of this money through trade, through the investing in luxury goods, and in banking. So they're doing all the things that it would take to get a lot of money. I think we'll stop there just for the sake of space on the paper. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll pick this back up with a discussion of what humanism is, which is kind of the driving philosophy of the Renaissance. So until then, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.